How great has this been? Incredible. Incredible. Thank you, Victory Noll. Thank you, all of us. So it's 2022. We're back here. We're checking in. We are joyful the way the 72, the Galilee 72 and the Huntington 72 really did their work. And Jesus is happy and we're happy. Imagine that. It's 2022 and we're looking back at these 5 years and we heard some things to grieve and we heard some things to rejoice over. And we're looking back and saying, we actually did something. We actually made things happen. So I look forward to 2022. I'm back here. I don't know about the rest of you. But we intend to do what we need to do to activate and mainstream gospel nonviolence, to bring it into its fullness and its being, to respond to the spirit and call of God for the well-being of all, to see all as beloved, beautiful, wonderful people throughout and beings throughout this planet. So I'm so appreciative of what we've been invited into since last night. It seems like a week ago or a month ago since we all started from my perspective. So I was asked to speak on bringing nonviolence home. And for those of us at Bene and Campaign Nonviolence, and I'm imagining for most of us, that is not simply in our minds, but that we actually bring it home into our own homes and into the great home of our planet and our universe. And I wanted to just say a couple things about home, but the main way we're going to invite us to bring that home is through action and through nonviolent action, everything that supports that action. So Henry Nouwen, the great spiritual writer, said this: how can we live in the midst of a world marked by fear, hatred, and violence and not be destroyed by it? When Jesus prays to the Father for his disciples, he responds to this question by saying, I'm not asking you to remove them from the world, but to protect them from the evil one. They do not belong to the world any more than I belong to the world. To live in the world without belonging to the world summarizes the essence of the spiritual life. The spiritual life, and this is the kicker, keeps us aware that our true house is not the house of fear, in which the powers of hatred and violence rule, but the house of love, where God resides. And then he goes on to say, which is true for my life and maybe for you, hardly a day passes without our experience of inner or outer fears, anxieties, apprehensions, and preoccupations. These powers have pervaded every part of our world to such a degree that we can never fully escape them. Still, it is possible not to belong to these powers, not to build our dwelling place among them, but to choose the house of love as our home. Violence is our titanic spiritual challenge of our time. In so many of the ways we've detailed since last night, and so many of the ways we know in our own spirits, it's easy to live in the world and house of fear, or to get stuck in the house of fear, or to simply give in to the house of fear. It's our great temptation, but our even greater call is to live in the house of love. St. Paul says that this house of love is God's own self. He is the one in whom, God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Here is an image of God as our true home, the mysterious and trembling field of spirit where we love and are loved, where we nurture and are nurtured. Every being finds rest and satisfaction and safety. Here we are welcomed and received. Here we enter the place of infinite value, where we discover who we are, as John said last night, beings who are loved tenderly, who bear within themselves the reality of the sacred. This God is the dwelling place in which we come back to our senses, return to consciousness, and approach the very heart of the matter. So, what I'm hoping for is to be part of a ramshackle group of people who, are creaky and, just don't have it all together, who are going for that house of love, who are going to be very explicit, not only of wanting to live in it, but helping to build it. And that brings us finally to Dr. King, who toward the end of his life wrote this great essay called The World House. So he says, we're all living in the same house, all of us. And this extends, of course, to the planet. Some of us are at the end with the swimming pool and the jacuzzi. Some of us are down at the end with no roof and no running water, but it's the same house. And we have to figure out once and for all how to live in that house. Of course, a theme that's echoed by Pope Francis's great encyclical on Laudato Si. It calls for the care for this common dwelling place and all its inhabitants. So, I invite us, sisters and brothers, I invite us to renew and deepen our consciousness of this vast unity, what Gandhi called difference without division, and take nonviolent action in our contexts and in our world. In our context, in our world. So what I want to do is lift up some examples of nonviolent action, and then I want to invite us to imagine and maybe even plan to be part of an action as one step in this direction with Campaign Nonviolence, September 16th to the 24th, wherever you're planted. We are now at 608 nonviolent actions in every one of the states in the country. Last year, we had 758. At this point, we had 225 last year. So we got 550 actions from the end of July until middle of September. We expect that to happen, but it won't happen without all of us being part of that process. To go public with that action, public action, public action, public action, where we say, everyone counts. And let's go for a culture of peace and nonviolence, free from war, poverty, climate crisis, racism, and all of forms of violence. So, what are some of those nonviolent actions? Let's begin with Jesus. So, and John made reference to us in his last comments. In Mark 3:1-6. Another time Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill, but they remained silent. He looked around at them, and in this anger, this distress, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And you're going, this is a great movie? Wow, everybody's going to be excited and clapping and going for it, and it's really great. And here's a guy who's at the margins of society. Now he's at the center, and he's standing in the middle of everyone, stretching out his hand. He's really cool, and everything's great, and he's whole, and it's what we want in life. Oh, and then there's the kicker, the last sentence. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Well, Martin Luther King and Dorothy Day and Gandhi and, dare I say it, John Deere taught us that we can't just hang back on the sidelines. We actually have to We have to go into this circle of magical immunity that the systems and the powers put around things like the Pentagon or Wall Street. Various injustices. Go to the movies. Go this way. Go this way. Don't. But people like Dr. King and our friend John Deere and Rosa Parks, what do? They just jump right into the middle of that circle of magical immunity. We are called, sisters and brothers, more and more to do this. To do this, to say that we are not going to stand on the sidelines. We're going to do as Jesus did. Oldest gospel, most scholars say, earliest part of that book, all of a sudden they're plotting his death because of a withered hand. Withered hand. And then we had a reference on the mural, 3 or 4 references to the man who accused the woman of adultery. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and he began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Now, at that point, he could have used violence. He could have accommodated. He could have avoided. He could have used counter-violence. Instead, this amazing nonviolent action. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. He was doodling. We've heard about doodling. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." He was teaching in the temple, the sacred place. And he had lots of people with him, and he could have whipped them up. And he would have been justified in using whatever violence was necessary to save her life. He goes a whole other way, this third way between passivity and violence. Well, we think about these two stories, a man with a withered hand and the men who accused this woman of adultery. What are some of the elements of action here? What are some of the elements of action here? It's public, it's embodied, so he's delivering the message. He doesn't just say, "Well, I'll get back to you," or send a text. He is delivering the message using the most powerful language at his disposal, his own vulnerable body. In this posture, and then in this straightening up, and jumping into the middle of this very charged situation, he's using the most powerful language at his disposal, his own beautiful, creaky, resilient body. Hey, that's what we have. We have this amazing language in this conversation with ourselves and our society. And this language is our own unarmed, beautiful, resilient body. This is the most powerful language that exists. It does something in the right brain when we see the body putting itself in risk for justice and for peace and for sustainability. It's public, it's embodied, it provokes reflection, it challenges systemic violence and the culture that upholds it. It's determined but peaceful. It's neither fight nor flight, but actually takes the best of both fight and flight and puts them together into this new thing of active and creative nonviolence. It breaks the spell and it prompts choice. So, as we think about what we're going to do, remember I told that story in San Francisco, we got in the room, we lit the candle, we turned the lights off, we just hung out there. Gandhi, it took him 3 weeks to come up with the Salt March. It took us a few hours to come up with this idea of the banquet in one of the key parks in San Francisco. But we didn't go in with that idea. We didn't know what was coming. I'm going to invite every one of us, beginning today, to actually open yourselves, your trembling hands to the Spirit, who wants a world of nonviolence and peace and knows it has to be embodied and gives us the Spirit and tools for that and gives us one another to make that happen. How can each of us be in a room like that, lighting that candle and waiting for that moment, that gesture, that drama, that word that helps communicate using our most vulnerable language, our bodies, to a world that is broken and longing for healing? I'm going to invite all of us to think, I can do this. I can be part of this in wherever I'm planted, wherever you're going back to after today. So we have a couple of stories from Jesus of nonviolent action, and there are many more, as we saw on our mural. But John has made reference to the fact that some of us, and this is mind-blowing, some of us have been part of this effort to invite the Catholic Church to make a shift for the first time in 1700 years to say that Jesus' nonviolence is the heart of the matter, that we're going to recommit to the centrality of gospel nonviolence. And some of us were part of an effort for a year with people all over the planet planning this, but it would have just been kind of like maybe just sort of a regular conference, but we were assiduously taking action all the time to call on Cardinal Turkson, who is the president of the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace, to say yes to this and to say this is going to be co-sponsored by the Vatican itself. And in December, after 7 months of biting our fingernails and praying, we got the message that they were going to go for it. And we set the dates because those are the dates he could be there. And then we had to scramble in a month and a half. We had to raise $150,000 because we wanted to bring people from all over the planet who couldn't afford to get themselves to Rome, from Mindanao and Chile and Colombia and Palestine and South Sudan and various places throughout Asia, Africa, North America, Europe, and so on. And we had this amazing experience. It really was like being in the upper room. It really felt like the Holy Spirit was with us. We didn't know each other, most of us, and something happened in that process. And out of it came this amazing 2-page document that really invited the church for an encyclical on nonviolence, urged Pope Francis to write an encyclical, a major church document, calling for this shift. And then many concrete things like, we would really like to see teaching, preaching, all the things John talked about, prophecy, throughout the church that really is integrating nonviolence at every level. And ever since then, we've been on a roll. We're on constant international conference calls. We have 5 research projects on 5 aspects of a potential encyclical that are going forward, biblical foundations, a new comprehensive theology of nonviolence, a new moral framework. How would active nonviolence be integrated throughout the church? All of these things. It's been a powerful experience, and it's still unfolding. And as you know, we were asked to be sort of background behind the stages in terms of helping with this World Day of Peace message that came out January 1st on nonviolence, a style of politics for peace. And ever since then, and anybody who wants to see this, I have collected these news articles and other reports from the Vatican. Pope Francis has begun to use the terminology of nonviolence and the culture of nonviolence exponentially since February, March, April of this year. It's very powerful. I think things are opening. We cannot guarantee it's the Pope who writes an encyclical, but we are at the church's service to try to see not just an encyclical, but how do we advance Catholic social teaching and more generally the possibility of reorienting on this in this powerful way. So I wanted to just share that. So some of the people there were these amazing folks from all over the world, And I just want to share a couple of actions, nonviolent actions, that they reported on to us. So we had people from the Philippines, from South Sudan, the Balkans, Mindanao, Sri Lanka, Mexico, Colombia. Participants shared their experiences of courageous negotiations with armed actors in Uganda, including Archbishop Odama's negotiating process with the Lord's Resistance Army, nonviolent resistance in Palestine, countrywide peace education in the Philippines. We heard from 80-year-old Bishop Taban and his courageous work in South Sudan, including his capture by rebel forces who became so moved by his nonviolent spirit that they eventually released him and announced that they would negotiate with the army only if Bishop Taban was one of the mediators. And we heard from Father Francisco de Rue, a Jesuit priest in Colombia who had been using nonviolent methods to help foster the recent peace process between the government and the FARC rebels. He told us in no uncertain terms that it was time to abandon the just war theory because both sides of the conflict had used it to fuel 50 years of bloodshed. He said both sides would appeal to the justified violence position, and it led to fueling that. In contradistinction to that, he and many other people created peace communities using nonviolent action to create the conditions eventually for this resolution of the conflict. Okay, so those are things that we're at the, but I have to share this. I just read this yesterday. Maybe you did too. Okay. So I saw this story in a little online newspaper called Upworthy. Anybody see that? Upworthy? Yeah, okay. Here's how it goes. This is this is the headline. These nuns built a lovely little chapel right in the way of a pipeline on purpose. Goes on about this chapel. But this open-air chapel isn't just for prayer. It's a protest. It's built directly in the path of an incoming natural gas pipeline. And it goes on about this. In response, the nuns teamed up with the local grassroots group, Lancaster Against Pipelines, to organize and construct the chapel in protest. They're very fine people. The result is that this is getting in the way. But it's coming out of this sense of prayer and purpose and spirituality and resistance. And, you know, if we had a week, and we've done week-long nonviolence trainings, if we had a week, I'm sure each of us could bring 3 or 4 examples of how faith-based and people of conscience have taken these kinds of actions. I'm going to then add just a couple stories from my life. Then I'm going to cut us loose. I'm going to invite us to think about, okay, well, if Ken can do that, or if Kit can do that, or if John can do that, or if those nuns in Lancaster, Pennsylvania can do it, we can do it too. We can do it too. So, way back when, I think I mentioned I spent 10 years trying to end U.S. wars in Central America. And one time, there was going to be some appropriation for Guatemala and El Salvador, $200 million. Which today seems small, but in 1985, that seemed like a lot. So we had a 5-day fast on the steps of our federal building in San Francisco, praying and fasting. And then on the 5th day after we prayed, we went inside and we put pictures of people who had been killed in Central America on the walls in the building. And we had a nurse draw some of our blood, and we poured it on the pictures because we wanted to dramatize what was going on there. Well, they didn't like that. And we ended up with 6 weeks in federal prison for this particular action. I got moved to 14 different places throughout the state of California. I get to this place called Terminal Island, which is in Long Beach, California. It's a prison facility, federal prison facility. I'm sitting on my bed, my bunk, and it hits me. Nobody cares what I did. What difference does this make? And I really, talk about lament, I just like totally felt like I was hitting bottom. I felt so depressed. I felt so alone. There's no way to contact people when you're in transit, so nobody knew where I was. I'm going, what the heck is this? And then I had this most amazing experience. I felt that I was being embraced by God, whispering in my ear, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I will be with you always. And I burst into tears. And they were cleansing tears. They were cleansing tears. I felt so renewed, alive, and fearless. I didn't have any anxiety or qualms the rest of that particular trip. Then I'm taken to my final destination, Mojave, in the Mojave Desert, Boron Federal Facility. It's a minimum security prison. So they have fences and so on, but they don't have like guard towers. So they try to keep you in line psychologically. So you go to an orientation, like going to college. They give you an orientation. Everybody gets up and talks about the place. But then they bring up, the last person they bring up is, I kid you not, Sergeant Lord. And Sergeant Lord comes up and he reads us all the riot act. You step out of line, we're going to beat you. You step out of line, we'll send you to a maximum security in West Texas. So we're all like, we get the fear of the Lord, literally, in us. So the next day, I'm walking along across the yard, and I hear this person go, you! And I look up, it's Sergeant Lord. And I'm going, well, nice knowing you. And he says, come here. And I go, yes. He says, go up on that ridge, because we're out in the desert, way out in the middle of nowhere. Go up on that ridge and collect cigarette butts. I went, okay. So I go up there, I'm picking up the trash. This Jeep Cherokee with tinted windows pulls up, the window comes down, and it's Sergeant Lord. And I'm going, this is the end. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. He goes, what the hell are you doing? I said, I'm picking up trash. I think you asked me to do that. He goes, no. What the hell are you doing in this prison? And I said, I was protesting the killing of my sisters and brothers in Central America. And he gets the meanest look on his face. I think this is the end. We're out here. It's his word against mine. But then he looks this way, and he looks this way. And then in a whisper, he says to me, they sent me to Vietnam. I killed a lot of people. I don't sleep at night. He said, if there's another war, I'm driving my kids to Canada. What you did probably made no difference, but I'm glad you did it. And there was this moment of this flow of infinity between our eyes. Maybe it was the first time he could cop to what he had done, to tell anybody about what he had done. It was certainly the first time I'd ever talked to a prison guard like that. And then he kind of caught himself and he goes, get this cleaned up, and then the window went up and he went off. But I realized that's why I went to prison, to meet Sergeant Lord. It was about trying to protest the war and trying to create a movement and be part of that. But it was to meet Sergeant Lord and to have a nonviolent encounter with Sergeant Lord. So, we don't know where it will take us. Even the most simple choreographed vigil or march or demonstration, it can open up many possibilities. You might meet somebody who will become a conversation partner in maybe a difficult way, maybe a Clara sort of way, or maybe not, for the rest of your life. I'm going to invite you seriously to reflect on what we've been doing since last night and consider some kind of action as a way of kind of experimenting with what we have been playing with since Friday, since last night. Some kind of event. It could be It could be a march. For example, I heard about letters to the editor. That's a great idea. What if you were to walk them over to the newspaper? You know, have a little procession, even 4 or 5 people to process over to the newspaper with the letters to the editor. Because part of what we're trying to invite myself and the rest of us to do is to go public with our call for a culture of peace and nonviolence. A vigil, a march, a demonstration, a rally. I know there are some people here already who have committed to some of those 608 nonviolent actions that are going to happen. So here's what I'm going to invite us to do. Now, I just want to be clear, nonviolence is not about trying to coerce you to do something. But we are going to invite you to seriously think about yourself and maybe some other people in your community actually organizing an event during September 16th through the 24th. Maybe September 21st is the International Day of Peace. So, and that would be a wonderful time. I already know that here at Victory Noll, an event is planned for September 21st, or in the planning stages. And that's so great, and those went around on the seats. I'm going to invite the rest of us to follow their lead. And if you haven't thought about an action or taking or the possibility of one, and maybe taking it home to those at home, you can think about building together something like this. Please seriously consider that. So KID is sending around a little form. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to get together in little groups and reflect on the possibility. We'd love to see over 1,000 nonviolent actions, because I think, especially at this moment, calling for the nonviolent option in the face of so much violence and injustice is imperative. And going public with that is critical, using the most powerful language at our disposal, our own vulnerable bodies. So, if you're open to considering that and exploring that, I'm going to get you into groups, and I'm going to invite you to think about something that you would be willing to help make happen in your community. You don't have to have the details. We'll follow up with you and get those if that comes to fruition. It's going to help us get to that place. And then secondly, to be thinking about, okay, how do I take nonviolent action going forward? Because we can't do it by ourselves. If we try to change the world by ourselves, we'll be destroyed by it. We need other vulnerable, cranky human beings to make that happen. Who am I going to get in my little cohort to help do that? What little group can I create like that?